Hi guys, first and foremost, let me thank you for watching my videos, for sharing my videos, for liking my videos in particular. There's also been a relative spike in subscribers, so that is very rewarding and gratifying. Please continue to watch my content. Whether you do or not, I'm going to keep producing it, so I'm going to keep making videos whether you like it or not. In the previous two, we looked at where interpreters work, how interpreters work, and today I want to talk to you about how an interpreter might prepare for a football assignment. I'm going to use a Europa League or a Champions League tie as my usual benchmark, as a reference point here. So let's start with a typical Champions League tie, a two-day job, match day -1 on the eve of the game. There'll be two press conferences there, one for the home team and one for the opposition, and the same goes for match day. The post-match press conferences on match day -1, there'll be the head coach and the player, whereas on the match day it will just be the head coach that attends the press conference. Let's start with match day -1 then. You can often anticipate who the player might be in the press conference depending on their nationality. Let's take for example Napoli against Liverpool, which is one of the games that I did this season. There weren't any players in particular that were native English speakers in the Napoli squad. However, Napoli chose Fernando Llorente to appear in the press conference on the basis that he had spent time playing for Tottenham and Swansea in England, and therefore he spoke English. As it turned out, no English questions were asked to Fernando Llorente in that press conference. So often you can look through the squad and think, okay, that player has played in this country, he speaks this language, so it's quite likely that he'll appear in the press conference because he'll be able to field questions in both the local language and the foreign language. As it went, Carlo Ancelotti was Napoli manager at that time. He'd also coached at Chelsea, so he also spoke English. And I also worked at Atalanta against Manchester City. Pep Guardiola had spent 2 or 3 seasons in Italy with Brescia and Roma, so he also spoke Italian. So often you'll be interpreting for coaches that speak not only the language of the team they're coaching, but also perhaps the language of the opposition. So that adds a layer of difficulty to the press conference. They do have an attentive ear when you're interpreting consecutively. Matchday -1, there's been a real change in terms of the dynamic, in terms of the availability and the visibility of press conferences. I remember the best part of a decade ago when I started, it was very hard to find practice material for interpreting assignments in football because there just wasn't this same culture of the press conference. The press conference has now become a real event in itself. Clubs are posting it on their YouTube channels. There are lots of bespoke YouTube channels as well that are putting press conferences out week in, week out. So you have lots of practice material and there is plenty of opportunity to get used to the speaker. That's the first thing that I'd advise. Go on YouTube and try and watch 4 or 5 or 6, half a dozen of the press conferences of the coach that you're going to interpret for. That can really help in terms of getting used to their style. Names are clearly very important, as in any interpreting assignment. You can't really hear a name and be able to reproduce it unless you already know that name. Certainly that's in my experience. So in football you have the squad list, but perhaps they might reference someone other than the player for either the home side or the opposition. In a matchday -1 press conference, strictly speaking, they should be talking about the game that they're going to play, and often the press officer will intervene there to make sure that the journalists stay on topic. But don't be surprised if there's a question or two about the team's last fixture, so a domestic game that they'd have played the weekend prior to coming in for that European fixture. So that's the matchday -1. As I said, press conferences, the proliferation, the availability of these press conferences has really increased over the years. When I first started, I remember having to register on the website of Saint-Etienne because they had their press conferences for registered users, and that was just to get some practice material from French. Now you can find whatever it is you want in all of the main countries, all of the main languages that operate in football. You can typically find what you need, so there's no excuse not to practice. Often the questions follow a similar sort of pattern. There's going to be a lot of talk about team news, so make sure you brush up on all of your injury terminology. Make sure you know the names, as I said. I typically try and just write the initials of the players and then rely on that jogging my memory when I'm working consecutively. So that's match day -1. There'll naturally be questions about the opposition to one coach. What do you know about the opposition? What do you make of your opposite number? Would you ever like to coach in this country? All of those questions crop up. I'll take the example of Napoli-Liverpool, an interesting fixture in that Liverpool came into the game as reigning European champions, so that brings with it a prestige in itself, and also the two teams had met at the same stage of the competition last season, so there was naturally a lot of reference to their previous meetings, which were relevant because they were in the recent past. So that's match day -1. There'll be the home team and the away team. Typically, if you're working in one specific market, maybe you're based in London and you work with Arsenal, Chelsea and Tottenham, you might be less familiar with the opposition sides because you're at the mercy of the draw. Maybe Arsenal play against Marseille and it's the first time that you've really encountered Marseille, or Spurs come up against Paris Saint-Germain, or maybe you work with Spanish and you have Getafe, who are in the Europa League this season. Clearly, you need to do a lot of boning up, you need to study a lot about who their coach is, who their players are, and a really useful resource is provided directly by the tournament organizer, UEFA in this case. On UEFA.com they provide media packs, and these are translated into several different languages, so you can actually just take the two media packs in the languages that you're working in and compare and contrast. So for instance, Napoli are facing English opposition for the 19th time in their history. Their record is 1-7, drawn 2, lost 9. I don't even know if those numbers add up correctly, but so there are lots of facts and figures in there. Maybe they speak about the fact that Lorenzo Insigne has scored 5 goals in as many matches against English opposition. He scored 2 the last time these two sides met. And those are naturally points which might be brought up during the press conference, so you can anticipate a lot of what is going to be said. That's for match day -1. Match day is both easier and trickier depending on which way you look at it. Easier in the sense that you have the entire context. You will be at the stadium, you will be watching the match. I fully recommend that you take notes during the match. I'm used to doing that as a football commentator anyway, but it's helped me as an interpreter working in football. Write down the minute in the margin and then write down who does what for which team. You could even split the page in two and have Liverpool's chances on the one hand, Napoli's chances on the other, because invariably the coach will refer to, we hit the post shortly before half time, or I wish that Llorente had been able to finish that chance and it might have given us more of a foothold on the game, for instance. So clearly those are examples. You do have the context of the match to work on. It can be quite difficult to take notes consecutively because often they're talking about specific technicalities within the game, patterns of play, passages of play, and there aren't necessarily good symbols or abbreviations for through ball, corner. You can obviously come up with all of these. The football jargon and terminology is fairly limited there. It can be very technical, but once again, as I said, you do have the context of the match to go on. Typically, the coach that's lost the match, unless it's been an absolute rout, they're going to talk about how they've been unlucky, how this was the turning point in the game, whereas the team that have won the match will naturally be praising their players, talking up their team's performance. Maybe they'll be also giving praise towards the opposition. It's much easier to give praise when you're ultimately the winner. There might be some controversy surrounding the referee and the match officials. VAR is going to be brought up, so video assistant referee, we're in that age as well. But those are typically the recommendations that I would make. Try and make full use of UEFA.com, of the media packs. Make sure you go on YouTube and really watch those press conferences. Once the draw is made, you know who the teams are going to be involved. You can anticipate a little bit of which player might attend the press conference. It can be quite likely that one club will put up a player knowing that they're comfortable and able to speak in both languages of the press conference. So those are a few hints and tips with regards to how to prepare for a football interpreting assignment. I'll be back with more videos soon. Any other questions, please drop them in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't done already, and please feel free to suggest any other areas of interest that might crop up. Thanks guys, see you on the next one.